Come one, come all! This is Illiterate. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
I watched a movie. This week we are doing The Peanut Butter Falcon, also
Huckleberry Finn.
Let's get into it. Peanut Butter Falcon was directed by Tyler Nilson and Michael Schwartz. It was released August 9th.
And Evan has his finger on the pulse.
I just saw it this week. I saw it with a packed crowd. I saw it with a packed crowd on a Tuesday. I think there was a retirement home on a field trip, so I think that's where I was. Which I was elated.
But Evan thinks this one's going to be big this year.
I do. I think come the fall, we're going to see some cool nominations for this. I don't know about Oscars per se, but I'm definitely watching SAG and Golden Globes. The big talk of the town is Zach Gottsagen. He is a Down syndrome young man. He's 34 years old, and he's the star of Peanut Butter Falcon. This is kind of a reappropriation of Huckleberry Finn.
Which is where I come into the picture.
Exactly. There's a lot of talk about it right now, but I think this is just going to keep getting bigger. I think this is going to resurge as nominations come up in the fall, and we just wanted to share it with you and talk about how Huckleberry Finn has kind of permeated the American pop culture
Because you certainly have read it in 7th grade or 9th grade or something and have forgotten everything or wonder why it's still controversial.
Exactly.
And why a movie that's potentially going to win a bunch of awards is based off of it.
Exactly. And how those things have helped us tell stories, and how we don't keep telling the exact same story, how we can keep changing these formulas as we go along. But yeah.
So just to get us started, Ernest Hemingway, who we all know and love, said all modern American literature proceeded from one book, Huckleberry Finn.
Ooh.
And so the question is why? We'll get into that in a second. But what is Peanut Butter Falcon for those who don't know?
Peanut Butter Falcon is the story of a Down syndrome young man who breaks out of a retirement home. He's held by the state in a retirement home. He breaks out to go and find his childhood star, the saltwater redneck wrestler. He wants to become a big famous wrestler like the saltwater redneck. So he escapes, and he runs into Shia LaBeouf's character, a fisherman who's kind of gotten into a little bit of trouble, is kind of on the run. So they become these like brothers on the run together. Meanwhile, the Zach Gottsagen character has a nurse who is trying to find him, and
hilarity ensues.
Hilarity ensues. Yep. But yeah, it's the feel-good movie of the summer, man. It's so positive. It's so joyous. I cried by the end of it. I mean, I was just elated. It was beautiful. I mean, it made me, it felt nurturing. The performance from Zach Gottsagen is just beautiful.
And this is in the South in the U.S.,
yes,
correct?
It's set in North Carolina. They shot it in Georgia.
Gotcha.
It really evokes that place and time.
But without being patronizing to that place, because I imagine there could be a lot of stories nowadays about rednecks or about
right. No, it's
trash,
not. Yeah, no.
like,
I think if anybody's seen the movie Mud, I think it very accurately portrays these types of areas in a love letter, but also it shows the beautiful sides of these places and the dark sides of these places.
Well, wonderful. Why is it called Peanut Butter Falcon?
That becomes Zach's wrestling name, his alter ego. There's a whole scene dedicated to the genesis of this name, because the Shia LaBeouf character kind of becomes his trainer. They're traveling from North Carolina. They're traveling a distance down off of the Outer Banks to try and get him to this. They're back and forth. They're walking a lot, and they end up meeting somebody that helps them fashion a raft.
Gotcha.
The Shia LaBeouf character was kind of rigging stealing from some crab traps, and the guys that own that traps are coming after him, basically, and they end up burning down that raft and puts them back on foot. So they kind of go back and forth with it. Eventually, they do get a car.
It sounds very similar to the setting for Huckleberry Finn, which people might know takes place on a raft going down the Mississippi. As far as why Ernest Hemingway would say this is the first truly American novel, because of course there had been novels written beforehand, the big three things that most people go into from a literary sense, and then we'll get into the content of the plot, is the language. Very first one, where it's written how 19th century Americans spoke.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
vernacular, they didn't want to sound like a hoity-toity, high-minded Charles Dickens kind of from the British sensibilities or whatever sensibilities you might have gotten in these other novels. He was just writing it how people spoke. There are also 7 different dialects. And I remember this from middle school when we read it. It's very hard to read because the way that the dialogue is written as you would say it with the accent.
Oh, wow.
So like with, for Jim, the slave's character is W-I-D. And that's how you say with. And so it's all written like that. Wow. It's also narrated from Huckleberry Finn's character, who is a semi-literate, vagabond, derelict child. So a lot of his description is in, I mean, it all is in the vernacular. So that element of it identifies mostly as this is what America was like at this time. This is in the heart of America, an American novel. And then the second thing, so it takes place in the Mississippi River, going down the Mississippi River. From Illinois, I believe, down to Louisiana. And all of that at that point in the 1840s where this was set is as far west as most people went. Like that was considered the near west. And it was also removed from the big cities that had more colonial influence on the coast, like New York and Philadelphia. And well, Philadelphia's not on the coast, but you know what I mean? Like the cities where that history was still entrenched in colonial America. As if you went into Missouri, that was just strictly Americans, you know? Ain't nothing to it. And then the third thing is kind of what they would call, which is very similar to Peanut Butter Falcon, a picaresque novel, which just means a novel of the road. And so there's a point A and a point B, and you're getting from here to there, and that's what the story follows. But in between is very episodic, and that's kind of what I got tired of because I'm dumb in middle school about it. It's just like, it doesn't seem like these elements connect. It's just a series of episodes of things that happen on their way down the river. But in the larger scheme, it's covering Huckleberry Finn's maturation from being ignorant to being cultured and understanding. But it seems like these things are just happening one after another. But basically, Huck Finn, derelict vagabond kid, his dad's a drunk. He is taken in by this widow Douglas and Miss Watson. Tom Sawyer is this kid who he's civilized, is what he says, because he can read and he knows stuff and he's in a home, you know, and Huckleberry Finn is just this kid who lives in a shack with his dad who just goes missing and drinks and steals and all that. So Tom wants him to go on these adventures. They had been in the adventures of Tom Sawyer. They had gotten a bunch of money from finding this, you know, secret den of whatever burglars that had stowed away their money. So now he has some money, but Huckleberry Finn's dad is like, I want that money. So he abducts him, takes him to his shack. So Huckleberry Finn fakes his death, escapes, and this is where he meets Jim, who is the slave, who was the slave that Miss Watson owned. And so Jim has also escaped from that situation. So we kind of see a parallel there between them. And then I wouldn't say hilarity ensues like in Peanut Butter Falcon, but a series of episodes ensue. They see a dead man in a floating house who we later find out was Huckleberry Finn's dad. Jim protects him from it. It's like, don't look at his face. It's messed up. He encounters these two feuding families in the South.
I have to say, I've forgotten all this. We've definitely covered this in some sort of class in middle school, but I don't know what I was doing, man. None of this is hardly ringing a bell, like the elements of it. But
we'll get into the censorship and how people have not wanted it to be taught in class for various reasons. But he encounters these other people that say that they're a duke and a king, and they're a bunch of con men, which is Mark Twain speaking to royalty and again society and how they pretend to be these noble creatures when actually they're a bunch of shucksters. So they get involved in a bunch of confidence games because they get in trouble with the town that they're duping, sell Jim to a family. And so now Huckleberry, because this whole time Huckleberry Finn's like, I want to be civilized. All he knows is civilized society, which is allowing slaves. So he is concerned, if I stay with Jim, I'm going to go to hell because that's what Miss Watson has told me. So this is the conflict that he has. He is entrenched in what the civilized society is, which is having slaves, duty, honor, all, you know, the old school stuff. And him, who is a derelict vagabond character.
Well, it just makes me think of Blue Eyes from Toni Morrison. Just the idea behind that book. It's hard. Just
It's like this kid who's having to reckon with the street smarts of it all. What's he supposed to do? So he decides, well, I'm going to get Jim out of there, which is the kind of turn at the end of the book at the Phelps farm. And he pretends to be this nephew of theirs who is coming to visit. Turns out the actual nephew who's coming to visit is Tom Sawyer. And so then Tom comes. Tom pretends to be this other kid who's a part of the family, since Huck has to remain pretending to be Tom. We'll get into the ending at the very end here and how that ties into Peanut Butter Falcon. But through a series of things with Tom Sawyer, Jim ends up becoming free, and Huckleberry Finn decides, I don't want to be a part of civilized society. I'm going to go out west. And that's how it ends. And so we'll get into that at the end. But that's kind of the through line. So I don't know if that rang any bells for Peanut Butter Falcon, or it's just the same kind of picaresque, like trip on the road, two characters who are misfits.
Exactly. They're both outcasts. They're both have kind of been forgotten by their families and have had to make families out of the people that have been around them just based on the context. The biggest thing with the Zach character is that the state really has no regard for him. That becomes kind of an early thing. So he's been relegated to, put him in this retirement home and forget about it. And his whole mission is that he's got to make it down to this training camp in South Carolina for this old wrestling star that he's seen on VHS tapes. And so when he meets the Shia LaBeouf character is on the run, and he's trying to get to Florida. So they're traveling down south the coast. They kind of end up on the same boat all at the same moment. The Zach character has escaped, and he's like naked and like greased up because he like squeezed through the bars of the thing. And Bruce Dern plays his roommate at the retirement home. So Bruce Dern helps him, like takes like wet sheets and squeeze the bars and like lube him up and squeeze. So now there's just a naked man running around lubed up. And so it's the next morning, and he makes his way down to a dock. And he's just looking for cover. So he gets in a boat, just like gets under the sheets. Well, this is the exact same moment that Shia LaBeouf's whole kind of his job. He's just lost his job because they realize he's been stealing the catch. And so he makes a split-second decision to like get back at the people that he stole from for some reason. And he ends up burning some of their equipment. And in this moment, jumps in the boat that Zach is in, and it spurs a chase. But this is the exact moment where he finds Zach under the covers, lubed up, and I think he's actually throwing up because of all of the motion sickness, just being on the boat and doing this whole thing. And so he finds him throwing up while they have to be totally silent, or they're going to be found out.
It's interesting what you're bringing up as far as their meeting and then following through with them working together. So in Huckleberry Finn, Huckleberry is on, or Huck, is on this island, and that's where he's escaped to. And then Jim is there, and that's how they meet up. And it's like, oh, we're here together on this island. Huckleberry Finn tries to see what's going on in town, realizes that what Jim's plan is he's like, I'm going to go and get my freedom and then go get the rest of my family since I'll be a free man. So a big turning point that people say in the novel is when people are coming for them and Huck's like, we gotta go, they're after us. And the us is the critical phrase, because it's like, clearly they're not after you, Huckleberry. They don't even know who you are or that you're here. But he identifies with them in their plight together.
That exact thing happens. I don't know if maybe it happens in the exact moment, but in maybe a 10-minute segment, you get it clicking with both characters that they're both running from different parties, that now this train is one in a way. You absolutely get that moment. And it happens in a beautiful... There's kind of two moments where this happens, where the Zach character is like realizing that I have a buddy on the run, you know, like, and just because of the beauty of this performance, like that is just one of the most elating moments of just like, it's oddly breaking the fourth wall because it's such a movie moment in a way. You're like, he is living it as well, of just like we're buddies on the run, and the audience comes in with that as well. I mean, everybody feels it, and it just feels like this kickstart for the second act, basically.
Yeah, and now that has become, largely in part because of this novel, a trope of like, it's two characters out together towards the same objective. For Huckleberry Finn, at least, as far as some of the controversy that has come about. And the big thing is censorship, which has changed the reasoning behind the censorship over time as culture changes, and then the issue of race and slavery. You know, the book came out in 1884, but it's set in the 1840s, which is before the Civil War. But he wrote it during the Reconstruction time after the Civil War. So this has over 120 years of conflict. From the beginning when it came out, the initial problem that people had was its crudeness, because a lot of people thought that the original Tom Sawyer thing, this was popular at the time, these boys' books of adventures and pirates and, you know, that kind of thing. This is not one of those books by any means. And so they were saying it's like, this is not appropriate. This is who is the main character? This lawless boy who doesn't follow the status quo, doesn't have parents, witnesses a ton of horrifying things. There's over 20 deaths in Huckleberry Finn. He sees this drunk person just get shot in the street. He sees these families murder each other that are having a feud.
Oh, wow.
You know, it's just, they almost die multiple times because people are just after them and grossly attacking them. The steamboat clearly sees them in the middle of the river at night, goes after them. They have to jump off, and that's how they get separated for a portion.
That actually kind of happens. They're trying to cross a river, and the Shia LaBeouf character is pulling Zach in tow. The LaBeouf character is getting to shore, but that only puts Zach right in the middle of the river, and at which a massive shrimping boat is coming directly at them. So that I think that's
and the shrimping boat and the steamboat at this time also was in completely disregard. It was like they were aiming for us, you know, and then when they went through us, just went full steam ahead. It was like they knew what they were doing, but there was a disregard for the people on the rafts.
Yeah.
But as far as what people were up in arms against, because the N-word was still being used, and there was still, just because, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation came about, doesn't mean that everybody changed their minds. That was less of the issue as opposed to what it's doing to the youth at that time. And I saw it saying Huck's having not only itched but scratched, which was considered obscene. So just even the way that Huck's describing things that he's doing, he's like, I scratched myself as opposed to I itched myself. And that was considered vulgar.
Oh, wow.
At the time. Little silly things like that. I found this quote by Mark Twain where he said, I am greatly troubled by what you say. I wrote Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn for adults exclusively, and it always distressed me when I find out that boys and girls have been allowed to access them.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and then he makes a joke about it. The mind that becomes soiled in youth can never again be washed clean. I know from my own experience, and to this day I cherish an unappeased bitterness against the guardians of my young life, who not only permitted but compelled me to read an unexpurgated Bible, though before I was 15 years old.
Wow.
It's just as a joke of being like, I can't believe they let me read this when I was little.
Right.
You know, and he said, apparently the Concord Library has condemned Huck as trash and only suitable for the slums. This will sell us another 25,000 copies for sure.
Oh my God.
But then, as time progressed, the controversy that came around was more so with race. The use of the N-word, the portrayal of blacks, especially Jim, the irony and ambiguity being lost on young readers, and the satire and parody that comes about from that not being able to be understood or having to be taught very appropriately. And then even people that are critical of it, it's like, you're adults.
Exactly. Are
you aware of some of the stuff he's trying to do? Or is he actually, Mark Twain, a racist person not understanding what's going on?
Right.
And then the potential for worse race relations, because there's a lot of controversy of doing this in schools. The N-word appears over 200 times in the book.
Wow.
If you have to read it aloud, or like reading the dialogue in the vernacular in a dialect, is that going to be offensive to people in the classroom? How do you address this appropriately to 14-year-olds? I remember it being weird. I remember we skipped over the N-words when we were in class.
Yep.
You know, as far as like the portrayal of black characters. I know we talked about Toni Morrison last week, and she had said that she was not into this book. It sort of affected her greatly as a kid. But I'll post a link. I found an essay from her that was called In Defense of Huckleberry Finn. And so she was basically saying how, yes, they're portrayed as caricatures and like a minstrel show, and you know, Jim is seen as the classic tropes of like the wise old man who's just bumbling along and doesn't really know what's going on, and you know, that kind of thing, and just has a heart of gold, but you know, just like no nuance to that. And she was saying that is not in so many words. I mean, it's an essay, so I'm not gonna say exactly, but the idea that I got from it was like, look beyond that. Yes, we know that that's the case. That's what happened in this story. That's what happened in this time of writing. We can argue about that to death, but what is this saying about Huck Finn's character, who now at the ending
his point
is left alone?
It's written by Mark Twain. Mark Twain's a human being with a limited point of view, like us all. It's interesting, and thank God Toni Morrison makes that distinction of like, look, how he writes about black people and black culture might not be totally great, totally authentic, but that's not what he's writing about.
Right.
What is he writing about? And what of that is useful, and what of that do we need to pay attention to? What about that is the point here? Are we missing the point?
Yeah, that he was a conflicted man whose parents had slaves,
right.
and he was in the Civil War for 2 weeks and was like, I can't do this,
right.
and fled west, and then is writing about these things and saying that this isn't for kids and trying to understand what it's like.
Right.
And now that Huckleberry Finn has gotten out of this situation, he's saying, I have to go west because I've tried to be in civilized society. That ain't for me.
Yeah.
Like he, as a kid, is conflicted about, well, if the civilized people are doing this, and now I can't have Jim anymore, who apparently I was uncivilized with, I've just got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And doesn't that speak to the American
go west
experience and potential of just like, oh, we can't fix this problem. Maybe if we go somewhere else, the problem won't show up again, or I can make my own way without this problem.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how that whole conversation has been reappropriated and exchanged in Peanut Butter Falcon for disability. Through and through. I mean, they put it right out there, that retard, and that strikes a reaction as soon as you hear it. And they put that full front and center.
Because I haven't heard that in,
Exactly. I mean, I remember saying it in middle school. I can't hardly utter it. What you just heard, like, it's like shivers down my spine. I hate it. And so the moment it's entered into this film, he's front and center. Zach is front and center. So you don't get to hide away. You don't get to not feel that. Mm-hmm. And so because it is forced in front of you, you are forced to feel that with him. Mm-hmm. It makes its point really, really clear, really fast. And I thought it to be a beautiful exchange. It was like, there might be issues with the race element of Huckleberry Finn, but the literary format, the structure here, and the idea behind these characters, and the way we can learn to love and learn to move away from things, all of that, I think, has been beautifully transported and comported into Peanut Butter Falcon. I mean, it's really, really gorgeous what the Zach character
and Evan and I like to have
story.
Yeah, we like to have a positive, optimistic view of literature and give people the benefit of the doubt, or at least try and see things from their perspective. So you might have personal critique and criticism of, and that's the thing. This has been argued about. This is why it was controversial since it came out, because Huckleberry Finn has been said, no, it's racist. It should never be talked about. It should never be dealt with. It's a disaster. And other people are like, no, it's wonderful. It's literature. It's saying something. It has points. It's doing it in a certain way that is different from what
your
came
response.
Out at the time.
Actually, the response might be the point. It's interesting to me in that is like, well, what was he trying to do? What was the intent? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and shouldn't that be how we judge these things?
Yeah,
I mean, more often than not.
You were saying the intent of Peanut Butter Falcon is the feel-good movie of the summer.
I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a feel-good movie of the summer, but I think the intent really here is to put somebody with a disability like this full front and center and give them the vehicle to be a movie star just like anybody else. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. The way this movie even came about is I just love the story of it here. The directors were counselors at a disability camp, I think in Vermont. And that is where they met Zach. And so Zach has been doing improv and scenes, and he's done video projects. You know, he's been doing this for a long, long, long time. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until these guys met him and talked with him. And he's like, oh, you want to be a movie star? They were then confronted with, well, we love Zach and we want the best for Zach and he can do this stuff. But that opportunity isn't really realistic. And how sad is that? So they sat back with that and decided to create the opportunity. They wrote the Peanut Butter Falcon script specifically for Zach, around Zach, with Zach, and then shot a proof of concept film, a 5-minute little teaser, just to showcase a little bit of the story and Zach through and through, that Zach was capable of doing this. And that there was a story here. And that alone got Shia LaBeouf on board, and then everybody else followed, Dakota Johnson, Bruce Stern, all the financing, and it just fell into place.
And the story itself is even a representation of real life, of him.
Exactly. They exchanged him wanting to be an actor in real life for just wanting to be a wrestler, to be a somebody, to be like the people we see on TV all the time. You know, the idea of heroes, who can be a hero, that's very, very prevalent in this film. And the idea that Zach learning that he is a hero, and that his disability doesn't come into that conversation about who you are and the role you play in this world. That his disability has really, like, it certainly doesn't have a negative place in that conversation, and that's really being illustrated here.
We've said it 1,000 times before, but that taking things from real life and your own life experience and imbuing your work with that is what makes it good. Exactly. Is what makes it meaningful. I found
they've injected life, real life into this thing through and through, and you feel it, man.
Mark Twain has, he has said a bunch of times that a lot of his stuff is up for debate, whether it's fact or fiction, and anybody attempting to find a moral will be shot and all that stuff like that. He jokes about it, but I did find that he said that the Huckleberry Finn character is based on a real-life kid, Tom Blankenship, that he grew up with in Hannibal, Missouri, and he was this kid whose father was a drunk, and he was all over the place and street smart and had such an awareness of what was going on, and said he had, both the best and the worst life at the same time. And just how Mark Twain's life, he had certainly taken elements from that. I'm sure, like they said, when he was in the Civil War, he wanted to dip out after 2 weeks.
Right.
And so he did and moved to Nevada, and that's where he stayed.
Wow.
And then at age 21, he became a riverboat captain up and down the Mississippi. So he knows that world and that place. And, and also then became a writer and lived in New York and lived in New England and got all of that world to understand how people think now after, the Civil War and what's happened. And I know that... How many
lives do you get to live in a lifetime? It's fascinating to me. I mean, it should be awe-inspiring. It's like, and that's just
so he put all of that in there. Yeah. How did you feel about the ending? Because like we said, the intent was for it to be feel-good, to go from point A to point B. I know that in Huckleberry Finn, and we mentioned this earlier, that the ending is a bit contentious. How was that as far as...
So... We're not going to quite spoil the ending here of Peanut Butter's Falcon, but just to give some hints about where it's going and relating to the Huckleberry Finn ending. When you have the eventual journey, you have the end place. The Zach character was trying to get to his wrestling camp, and then the Shia LaBeouf character was going to drop him there, finish the deed, and then go on to Florida. And it's in this time that the Dakota Johnson character, the nurse character, has caught up with him and is now kind of joined in their pursuit. She's a little bit reluctant to actually buy in, and that's kind of a lot of the tension through the back half of the film is can she buy into the magic that's happening between the two of them. And so the wrestling camp stuff is happening. It's a magical time for Zach, but there's a lot going on there. I won't spoil. It's magical, but also not a magical time for Zach.
As most endings.
At this exact moment is Shia LaBeouf's past is kind of catching up with him. They're figuring out where he is. And they have a point here where I think the filmmakers had a choice, and I would love to talk to them about what the decision was here. They take one of these characters, and they had a choice to send him in one direction or the other. The way they sent them, it's the feel-good movie of the summer. I love it. I mean, it's great. There was another choice here that I think would have grounded it and would have really backed up a lot of the themes, a lot of the tone, a lot of the seriousness that you kind of forget about in this movie that's baked into right under the surface here. I think they could have really enforced that with a decision with one of these characters right at the end. They didn't go that way.
And that's a beautiful, that's a beautiful description, because it's exactly how people feel. Back to that Ernest Hemingway quote about all modern American literature proceeded from one book, Huckleberry Finn. He has another little thing as a part of that quote, which is like, except for the last third of the book. Yeah, like read it up until, and most people feel that way. So I completely forgot the ending of Huckleberry Finn or how any of it goes down. But like I said, I
didn't know there was any controversy about the ending until this
well, there is. You're going to find it out. We dishing out here. So, like I said, those con men shucksters who sold Jim off to another family, and then Huckleberry Finn's like, well, I got to get him back. So then he pretends to be the nephew of that family who's coming into town, who ends up being actually Tom Sawyer is the nephew. So now Tom and Huck are back together. Jim has been taken by this family who's going to be sold off to somewhere else or worse, or back where he was. Huck's like, well, let's just steal the key and set him loose, because he's just, locked up in this shed somewhere. We're going to set him loose, and then he can go back on his way. And Tom Sawyer is coming up with this elaborate plan involving all of these things and injuring him and this and that and writing secret notes to people, and just the classic romantic notion of the Tom Sawyer adventures. Now he's back in the game coming up with. Huckleberry Finn goes along with it because, again, Tom Sawyer's smarter than he is, quote, knows what's going on, knows how to do stuff. Right. It all falls awry. Tom Sawyer gets shot in the arm or leg or something on the way out. They catch everybody. They catch Jim. They catch him.
God.
It's revealed that Tom Sawyer knew what was going on in the sense that Miss Watson, who was Jim's owner, had died 2 months ago.
Oh.
And had put in her will that the second she died, Jim was going to be free. So there was no moral, weight on Tom Sawyer's conscience coming up with this plan, because he's like, even if it doesn't work out, Jim's still going to be free. So he was just doing it for fun, essentially.
Oh.
So now Jim is free from this kind of deus ex machina. Well, it was going to be fine anyway, so it's all fine,
free.
Right?
He was free for 2 weeks, he just didn't know it.
Yeah, 2 months, yeah.
2 months, yeah.
Yeah. So that all worked out. Then Jim goes free. And then this is, like I said, where Huck Finn's like, well, I'm just going to go west because I don't understand any of this stuff.
Right.
And so people are like, well, that's a stupid end to the story of just like, well, everybody's fine and it's all fine and everything's fine. But the analysis of it in modern times nowadays is like, Mark Twain was writing this in the Reconstruction era, where things were not actually that fine after the Civil War.
Right.
A lot of people thought things were civilized. It's like, cool, now everybody's free, everything's fine and dandy. No, like there was still sharecropping, there was still indentured.
We elected Barack Obama in 2008. We still,
yeah,
we thought racism was over then.
Yeah, it's like just because you say the thing happens doesn't mean it happens.
Right.
And so a lot of people say that that is the Tom Sawyer's character, and why it's interesting, why people are like, oh yeah, the Tom Sawyer book, that's not really that good. So maybe that was the point of that too, is making fun of those stories. And then the fact that he comes in at the beginning and end of this story as the voice of reason in society, when actually it's all kind of not fixed. Or it's like, the right thing to do, but you're creating these situations and silly circumstances under the guise of, oh, this is how you save somebody.
Right.
It's like you actually haven't done anything.
No, Tom, you just made it.
And also, you're
really
safe. You took no risk. You know what I mean? Huckleberry Finn is actually taking risks throughout and actually doing the right thing by staying with him and going back to... I mean, he could have just... The whole time, he's like, oh, I shouldn't save Jim. I should be giving him up. He's wrestling with this. Like, am I doing the right thing by having him here? And going along with him, and then chooses to go back to the family and try and get him out. Lo and behold, Tom Sawyer comes in and says, no, it's all fixed anyways. And isn't that a reflection of that time and place in the 1880s?
No, we have a simple answer for it.
Yeah.
Gotta love looking for those simple answers.
And the fact that, and just the fact that Huck Finn's like, well, what do I do? And this is where Toni Morrison is saying, like, this is why potentially we need this, because the only fatherly real character that appears to Huckleberry Finn is Jim.
Yeah.
So however skewed and misrepresented black people are in the Jim character, he's the only thing that makes sense to Huck.
Yeah.
And then Huck's answer to that is, well, I guess I just have to go away. I guess I just have to go west. And is that the American response to things? It's just fascinating. So, barring in a story context... Well,
I think it did become, it only increasingly so after the idea of go west. It just kept going. I mean, look, here we are.
Yeah, and so like I said, in the context of the actual story and narrative, it seems like a cop-out, but then again, isn't that the point? What is the intent?
Right.
It's not designed to be the feel-good family movie of the summer.
Right, it's supposed to make you question, and what's really going on? It's not so simple. You can't just like put a bow on something and say, happy birthday. Like these problems take real work.
Yeah, if the story context bothers people where they're like, well, this isn't a proper representation of this. Like, I get what Mark Twain's trying to go through, but I want actually what this is about. There was a book that came out in 2005, which has really, really good reviews. It's called My Jim, and it's from the perspective of Jim's family, who are still slaves because he's gone. Right?
Oh.
And it's like, what's happening with them and waiting for him and the true test of love. Because he escaped. Remember at the beginning, his plan was, I'm going to become free and then I'm going to get them out.
Right. And
it's like, it's heartbreaking and a tragic novel, but it's very, very interesting to say, well, okay, well, if we don't want that perspective of Huckleberry Finn, what's the perspective of Jim's family?
Right.
And what does that mean to him? We know now we can recontextualize him as the hero and as the good guy who's trying to do the right thing, and what his family remembers him as, and is he going to come back, or is he dead, or what's happening with him?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Who did that?
Nancy Rawles.
Nancy Rawles.
It's called My Jim.
Also, for the links this time around, there's a great 6-minute featurette for Peanut Butter Falcon that kind of lays out the story about the genesis of it and that they've been pushing. It's really, really nice.
Yeah. And that is Huckleberry Finn and the Peanut Butter Falcon.
Alrighty. Well, that was great. I mean, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed the film. It's still in theaters right now. Catch it if you can. It'll be out on DVD come award season for sure. Yeah.
Huckleberry Finn is out forever.
Forever and all time.
Yeah.
Do we have any special announcements this weekend, Taylor? Or this week, Taylor?
Just Instagram.
Just the old Instagram, y'all. At illiterate pod on Instagram. That's where you can get in touch with us, find out what's happening, get our sick memes. Yeah, come get in contact with us. Show us what you're excited for. What books are you into? What movies, TV shows? Any suggestions? Any of that stuff.
Next week we have the horror mega book.
It. Here we go. Chapter 2 coming out. We'll be hitting you with it. Also, check out our IndieBound links for Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.